As global economic uncertainties continue to mount, China finds itself grappling with a significant decline in tax revenue, a situation that complicates its fiscal landscape amid escalating tensions with the United States. Recent reports reveal that the Chinese government is facing a challenging financial environment undermined by sluggish economic growth and the looming specter of tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. According to a detailed analysis from the New York Times, tax revenue in China fell by 3.4% last year, marking a sharp deviation from the steady income stream that had previously fueled government investments in infrastructure and social programs. While this percentage may appear modest at first glance, it conceals a much larger narrative of economic distress, particularly when juxtaposed with an official GDP growth rate of 5% when adjusted for deflation. This contraction in government revenue occurs against a backdrop of a housing market crash and rising local government bankruptcies, leaving the national government with less financial leeway to support beleaguered consumers and exporters. The ramifications of these fiscal challenges are stark. With President Trump having imposed a 20% tariff on Chinese goods and threatening further increases Beijing's ability to bolster its export industries, critical drivers of economic growth, has been severely hampered. This situation places Chinese leaders in a precarious position as they seek to navigate an increasingly hostile trade environment. The government's previous reliance on robust tax revenues to fund extensive subsidies and military investments has eroded, leaving officials scrambling to devise new strategies to stimulate consumer spending. Deflation has emerged as a primary driver of the declining tax revenue, with many companies and households struggling to meet debt obligations. The situation has prompted officials to propose spending initiatives aimed at supporting consumers, including higher pensions and improved medical benefits. However, despite these ambitious plans, actual government spending has remained stagnant, raising questions about the government's financial capacity. Experts attribute this reticence to a combination of Xi Jinping's cautious fiscal philosophy and the stark reality of diminishing revenue. The broader implications of this financial strain are significant. As local governments, which rely heavily on land sales for revenue, face plummeting income due to the housing market crisis, the national government is increasingly burdened with the responsibility of bailing them out. This dynamic has led to a growing budget deficit, which, according to Fitch Ratings, could reach as high as 9% of the economy when considering actual revenue against expenditures. The stark reality is that if revenue had kept pace with economic growth over the past several years, China could have had an additional $1.5 trillion at its disposal in 2025. Moreover, the long-standing absence of taxes on investment gains, inheritances, and substantial real estate taxes limits the government's ability to generate new revenue streams. As a result, while the government attempts to maintain stability and avert a deeper economic crisis, the lack of effective fiscal measures may lead to increased public discontent and economic stagnation. Looking ahead, China's leaders face a dual challenge: addressing internal economic woes while simultaneously navigating the complexities of international trade relations, particularly with the U.S. As President Trump's administration continues to apply pressure through tariffs and trade policies, the potential for heightened tensions in the Indo-Pacific region looms large. While immediate solutions may be difficult to implement, analysts suggest that China's long-term economic strategy must evolve to adapt to these new realities, particularly in enhancing revenue generation and fostering domestic consumption. In conclusion, as China grapples with declining tax revenues amidst rising economic pressures, the interplay between domestic fiscal challenges and international trade dynamics will likely shape the country's future trajectory. The next steps taken by Chinese leaders in response to these issues will not only determine the nation's economic health but could also have profound implications for global trade relations in the years to come. In a time of economic uncertainty, China finds itself grappling with a significant decline in tax revenue, a development that could have far-reaching implications for its economy and global trade relations. As Beijing prepares for potential tariffs imposed by President Trump, the government faces increasing pressure to support a struggling economy that is reeling from a housing market crash and an expanding budget deficit. Recent figures from China's latest government budget indicate a worrying trend. Tax revenue has dropped, marking a stark departure from the historical norm. Until recently, China enjoyed robust tax collections that funded extensive infrastructure projects, military enhancements, and industrial subsidies. However, this trend has reversed dramatically, with overall tax revenue plummeting by 3.4% last year. While this may seem modest, it starkly contrasts with the economy's purported growth rate of 5%, raising concerns about the government's ability to finance essential programs. The causes of this decline are multifaceted. A significant factor is deflation, which has caused both consumers and businesses to pull back on spending. Companies are finding it increasingly challenging to meet their debt obligations, leading to a ripple effect that affects government revenue. As Keith Bradsher from the New York Times reports, the drop in tax collections leaves China's leaders in an unusual spot after years of funding infrastructure, military growth, and industrial subsidies. Adding to the economic strain is the impact of tariffs. President Trump's administration has imposed a 20% tariff on Chinese goods, with indications that further tariffs could be on the horizon. This creates a dilemma for Chinese policymakers who traditionally relied on strong tax revenues to support their export-driven economy. With less financial leeway to assist key industries, the government's ability to mitigate the adverse effects of tariffs is significantly compromised. Local governments are particularly hard hit, having seen their revenues diminish due to a collapse in land sales, a primary source of income for many municipalities. Fitch Ratings notes that government revenue as a percentage of the economy has dropped from 29% in 2018 to an anticipated 21.1% in 2025. This decline translates to a staggering $1.5 trillion that could have been injected into the economy had revenue growth kept pace with the economic output. Efforts to stimulate consumer spending through increased pensions and Social Security benefits have been met with limited success. While government officials have repeatedly hinted at upcoming financial support measures, actual spending increases have been negligible. This reluctance to open the fiscal floodgates stems partly from the leadership's ideological stance against excessive welfare spending, as articulated by President Xi Jinping in a 2021 speech. The situation could worsen in 2025. As the Finance Ministry's budget continues to rest on optimistic assumptions regarding tax revenue and economic performance. Analysts predict that if local governments remain cash-strapped, the broader implications for social spending and economic growth could be dire. China's fiscal challenges are compounded by a unique taxation structure that lacks robust taxes on investments or real estate, limiting the government's ability to diversify its revenue streams. Consequently, the combination of plummeting consumer spending, weakened tax collections, and a struggling housing market creates a precarious fiscal landscape for the Chinese government. As China braces for potential trade tensions with the United States, the stakes have never been higher. The government's limited financial flexibility could hinder its capacity to respond effectively to internal economic pressures and external trade challenges. With ongoing uncertainties in both domestic and international markets, observers will be watching closely to see how China navigates this complex economic landscape in the months and years to come. The intersection of declining tax revenue, tariff implications, and a faltering housing market could redefine China's economic strategy and its role in global trade. In a significant turn of events, China is grappling with a notable decline in tax revenue as it prepares to confront the economic ramifications of heightened tariffs from President Trump. The recent budget released by the Chinese government revealed alarming figures that underscore the nation's financial challenges, prompting concerns over its ability to stimulate an economy already burdened by a housing market crash and mounting debts among local governments. The backdrop of this financial strain is the imposition of a 20% tariff on Chinese goods by President Trump, a move that has left China with limited fiscal resources to support its exporters and consumers. This dual pressure has placed China's leadership in a precarious situation, especially as they face a decline in tax collections for the first time in years. The decline means that China's national government has less money to address the country's serious economic challenges, reported Keith Bradshaw of the New York Times. Tax revenues fell by 3.4% last year, a stark contrast to an economy that, according to official statistics, grew by 5%. This discrepancy is particularly troubling as it reflects a broader trend of deflation impacting businesses and government alike. Companies are finding it increasingly difficult to meet debt obligations, and as Bradshaw points out, the Chinese government may not have the money needed to implement recommended economic stimulus measures. The challenges are compounded by the fact that local governments, which are responsible for funding pensions and social services, have seen their revenues plummet due to a crash in land sales. This decline has left many local authorities struggling to meet their financial commitments, further exacerbating the economic malaise. Analysts estimate that if overall revenue had kept pace with economic growth over the past 7 years, the government would have had an additional $1.5 trillion to address these issues in 2025. In the face of these difficulties, the Chinese government announced it would increase its budget deficit target to 4% for the year, a significant shift from its previous efforts to maintain it near 3%. Yet this adjustment does not fully capture the reality of the fiscal situation. According to Jeremy Zook of Fitch Ratings, deficits are quite high and debt is rising quickly, indicating that the financial landscape is more precarious than official figures suggest. The broader implications of these developments extend beyond just economic metrics. They signal a potential shift in China's approach to governance. The country's historical reluctance to engage in expansive social welfare programs, as emphasized by President Xi Jinping in past speeches, may now be challenged by necessity. However, despite repeated promises from officials to enhance support for consumers, tangible actions have yet to materialize. Amidst this economic backdrop, U.S. Senator Steve Daines met with China's Vice Premier He Lifeng, marking the first visit by a U.S. politician to Beijing since Trump's re-election. This meeting comes at a critical juncture as tensions continue to rise over trade practices and the flow of substances like fentanyl into the United States. Daines emphasized the importance of constructive dialogue, mirroring sentiments expressed by He about the potential for cooperation between the two nations. The senator's visit is seen as an effort to bridge the widening gap in U.S.-China relations. As China navigates these turbulent waters, the interplay between fiscal policy, economic recovery, and international diplomacy will be crucial. The coming months will reveal whether China can leverage its remaining fiscal space to stimulate growth while managing the pressures of external trade tensions. With the global economic landscape in flux, the stakes are high for both China and its international partners. The outcome of this complex situation may well shape not only China's economic future but also the global market dynamics for years to come. As tensions rise in the Indo-Pacific region, U.S. allies are left grappling with uncertainty over trade and security policies under the Trump administration. Following a series of decisions that have strained relationships with traditional partners, President Trump's approach has left nations such as South Korea, Japan, and Australia questioning the reliability of U.S. support in the face of potential conflicts with China or North Korea. The Trump administration's aggressive trade policies have been reminiscent of its earlier strategies in Europe, where the president's criticisms of NATO allies sowed discord and mistrust. Now similar concerns are emerging in the Indo-Pacific, where the U.S. has imposed tariffs on aluminum and steel imports from allies like Australia and has threatened to extend these tariffs to Japan and South Korea. These moves have raised alarms among U.S. partners as they contemplate the implications for their economies and security cooperation with the United States. Seth Jones, a defense expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, emphasized the potential fallout from these trade tensions. Tariffs against the Australians or current or future tariffs, particularly increases against the Japanese and South Koreans, would certainly not be helpful in contributing to a close partnership with those countries. The risk is that such punitive measures could weaken alliances that are critical to the U.S.'s strategy of containing China's growing influence. Historically, the U.S. has maintained strong security agreements with these nations since the 1950s. a framework that was bolstered under the Biden administration through strategic security pacts like AUKUS and agreements with Japan and South Korea. These alliances have been pivotal in implementing the First Island Chain strategy designed to counteract potential military actions from China. The Biden administration's commitment to defending Taiwan against Chinese aggression marked a significant shift from previous U.S. policy, which had maintained strategic ambiguity. However, the unpredictability of Trump's current term has left leaders in Japan, South Korea, and Australia feeling anxious. John Nielsen Wright from the University of Cambridge noted that there is a profound sense of anxiety in these countries concerning the future of U.S. foreign policy. In light of Trump's trade wars, there are fears that Asia could become embroiled in a similar cycle of retaliatory tariffs seen in North America and Europe. Yoon Sun, director of the China program at the Stimson Center, articulated this concern, stating, "I think there is a fear that this is only going to escalate." Trump's history of abruptly shifting his foreign policy tactics adds to the uncertainty. His administration's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership early in his first term exemplified a stark departure from prior trade agreements, leaving a vacuum that China has sought to fill. The former president's inconsistent rhetoric regarding North Korea further complicates the regional security landscape, oscillating between bellicosity and overtures of friendship toward Kim Jong-un. As Trump's administration grapples with these significant foreign policy challenges, it faces mounting pressure from allies to clarify its intentions and reaffirm its commitments. The political climate in the Indo-Pacific is already fraught with uncertainty as leadership changes loom in countries like South Korea and Australia. Without a coherent strategy, the risk of miscalculations and alienation among allies grows, raising questions about the future of U.S. influence and stability in the region. Amidst this backdrop, nations like Japan and Australia are re-evaluating their military postures. Japan, for instance, has announced plans to double its defense spending by 2027, a clear response to perceived threats from China. As these countries seek to fortify their security frameworks independently, the U.S. must navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries to ensure its strategic interests are preserved. As the situation continues to evolve, the implications of Trump's policies on trade and security will undoubtedly shape the future landscape of the Indo-Pacific. The delicate balance of power hinges on the ability of the U.S. to rebuild trust and clarify its role as a reliable partner. The coming months will be critical as allies await definitive signals from the Trump administration regarding its commitment to the region, leaving open the possibility for both cooperation and conflict in an increasingly precarious geopolitical environment. In a significant diplomatic move, China has reiterated its opposition to the weaponization of economic and trade issues during talks with U.S. Senator Steve Daines. This meeting held in Beijing underscores the complexities and tensions that continue to define U.S.-China relations, particularly in light of recent political developments and trade disputes. Vice Premier He Lifeng made it clear that China is open to candid dialogue with the United States, suggesting a desire to engage in discussions that are both respectful and constructive. He emphasized the potential for cooperation between the two nations, stating China and the U.S. have extensive common interests and broad room for cooperation. We can become partners and friends, achieve mutual success and prosperity together, benefiting both countries and the world. This sentiment reflects a broader strategy by China to stabilize its economic relationships amid rising tensions, especially as the U.S. implements tariffs that impact Chinese products. Senator Daines' visit marks the first in-person dialogue between a U.S. politician and high-ranking Chinese officials since Donald Trump resumed the presidency in January. Daines acknowledged the importance of the U.S.-China relationship, advocating for strengthened dialogue and expressing his willingness to contribute to this effort. The backdrop of these discussions is critical as both nations grapple with their economic policies and geopolitical positions. Simultaneously, Japan, China, and South Korea convened in Tokyo, where their foreign ministers pledged to bolster cooperation and promote peace on the Korean peninsula. This trilateral meeting came on the heels of a rare summit earlier in the year and is particularly relevant given the rising tensions related to North Korea's military activities and its support for Russia amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol highlighted the shared responsibility of the three nations in maintaining stability in the region, which has historically been fraught with territorial disputes. The Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya noted the international situation has become increasingly severe. And it is no exaggeration to say that we are at a turning point in history. This statement underscores the urgency of diplomatic efforts as geopolitical dynamics shift. While China maintains a critical alliance with North Korea, Japan and South Korea often adopt a more confrontational stance towards Pyongyang. This divergence in approaches complicates the trilateral relationship but also emphasizes the necessity for dialogue. During the meeting, Iwaya conveyed Japan's concerns regarding contentious issues such as territorial disputes and the situation in Taiwan, while Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, called for a future-oriented cooperation framework. He noted that with the world facing significant uncertainties, it is essential for major economies like Japan and China to collaborate effectively. The discussions also touched upon broader global challenges, including climate change and the implications of unilateral actions that threaten international norms. Iwaya warned against any attempts to alter the status quo through force, signaling Japan's commitment to a stable and rules-based order. As these diplomatic overtures unfold, it is clear that both China and its neighbors are navigating a complex landscape shaped by external pressures, including U.S. tariffs and regional security threats. The willingness of these nations to engage in dialogue may pave the way for a more cooperative framework, but significant challenges remain. Looking ahead, the future of U.S.-China relations and regional dynamics in East Asia will likely hinge on the outcomes of ongoing dialogues. As nations grapple with the implications of economic protectionism and geopolitical tensions, the importance of candid discussions and collaborative efforts cannot be overstated. The next steps taken by U.S. and Chinese leaders alongside their regional counterparts will be pivotal in shaping a more stable and prosperous future for the region and beyond.